Okay, I'm getting out my huge version of my Shakespeare anthology. I'm such a fucking nerd. Look at all of this. But also, like, having the privilege and opportunity of actually being able to go to a college where I could even have the chance to be nerdy about Shakespeare. Okay, so there is this video that I wanted to show about Othello. This is a very colonized perspective, and then we're going to get into more of the decolonization as we go along. This intro is pretty lengthy to Othello, so I don't think I'm going to have time to read the full thing today, but we will be getting into it more tomorrow. I do think it is very important, especially as we are diving into like how we did for the Communist Manifesto, the Manifesto of the Communist Party, um, as well as like uh, some of these more these denser texts that often are used like as a gateway and to be elitist and be like, oh, you have to have all of this type of knowledge in order to understand them. I don't think that's always the case, but I do think it helps to like actually take our power back and like use the type of like learning that I was exposed to, but you don't have to like pay tuition to get it. So like not like I am claiming to be like this superior intellect or whatever the fuck that means, but actually have it be a little more accessible for everyone. And I think it's really helpful to have some of this context so that when we're reading the text, we can get into more of like the meat of it right away. But, you know, if there are any like questions and stuff as we go along, do ask because I welcome questions. I think this is a good thing. We should all be asking more questions, like of ourselves, of other people, of the world we live in. So, at the risk of being cheesy, which I constantly am and fall into that, shall we start with this little intro?
Othello might be Shakespeare's.
Okay, this is Shakespeare play by play. I guess I should say that first. An introduction to Shakespeare's Othello's context, themes, and characters. This is the information you should know before you start the text, and not limited to this. I read theory. I love Clifford the Big Red Dog. Yeah, exactly. It's like, what are we actually viewing as, um, like we were saying, intelligence? And I think, especially when it comes to these types of texts, or even like leftist thought in general, that there are many people that think like it's good to be like reading and educated, but I think that is one of like the pitfalls of organizing is when there are people who think you have to have like it's good for us to be educated about certain things, but also like what does that even mean? Do people have access and free time to these resources to be reading all the time? That reading is a colonized concept as well. So like all of these things are at play here and quite literally in the play. But also like you shouldn't have to feel like you are not quote unquote smart enough to engage with some of these texts. That's just a fallacy. And that often is supported by like these gatekeeping academic entities in order to justify paying a shit ton of money in order to have any sort of knowledge. Even Bluey is theory. Yeah, even like especially Bluey at times, where it's like, yeah, everything can be theory. And it's very reductive to be viewing people's intelligence just based on schooling, not only reductive, but also classist.
Tragic tragedy. In it, a strong and charismatic man, respected by everybody, marries a brave and virtuous woman, equally beloved by everybody. Their marriage happens against her father's wishes, but they overcome that obstacle only to run into a villain named Iago, one of the most interesting and influential characters in the history of English literature. It is a frustrating play to read or watch, but we're going to do it anyway. This is going to be a 7 video series that goes through this play act by act.
Okay, so he is an Iago dick sucker. Okay, not like there's anything wrong with sucking dicks. Love that. Cool. Amazing. But he is, I guess I should say, in just unnecessarily for Iago. And I think that is something that academics really love about Othello. And I think that is kind of a simplistic way of looking at the text. That, like, yes, he's a manipulative person, but also, like, he talks so fucking much. And, like, we don't need to hear from him as much, which is why Toni Morrison's play Desdemona doesn't feature Iago at all. Like, she was like, I find him to be irritating. And I always thought that. And my professors would be annoyed at me sometimes when I would say that, because it's coming more from like this very classist, like racist, colonized perspective, essentially, of being like, no, he's the super villain. And it's like, no, he's just like acting in ways that like the system allows him to be acting. So anyway, the important aspect is what praxis is. Theory informed action, then reflected on into the new theory. Yes, exactly. No need to read dead old white guys to participate. Yes. And I think that's why, like, there are some people on the left that can be, especially when it comes to like white leftists, that there's all this gatekeeping of like, if you don't use certain phrases or terminology, like, that doesn't mean that like you can understand people's hearts and minds. As like, again, maybe that sounds like cheesy, but I mean that in a sincere way. And I think there is not enough sincerity in the world. That uh like, you, like, just because people aren't saying like what you view as to be like the quote unquote right thing doesn't mean that like you can actually assess what their capacity is to learn, and also like what their intentions are. Because like, I've known people personally who are able to like say the right kinds of terminology, but they treat people like shit. So like, do you actually believe what you are reading? Just because you know how to talk about it doesn't mean you know how to act about it. So that's exactly what you're saying, anarcho taco.
Introduce you to some academic conversations that have been ongoing since the time that the play was first performed in 1603. This is a play that has been popular since that first performance and has maintained that popularity for over 400 years. My hope is that these videos will help unlock some of the themes of this play and give you the vocabulary to engage with the big ideas contained within it, and help you perhaps find some wisdom in it. Maybe they will give you something clever to say in class, or help you write a paper, or whatever, maybe sound interesting at a dinner party. This first video is going to give you some background information and historical context, and introduce you to some of the larger themes that will be discussed throughout the series. And if this sounds interesting to you, please consider subscribing to be notified when future videos and future seasons are published. And with that out of the way, let's start up this season on Othello. So Shakespeare drew inspiration for Othello from an Italian source. The characters and general outline come from a mid-16th century Italian novella by Giovanni Battista Giraldi. He was nicknamed Cinthio. It includes an unnamed Moor who marries a wealthy woman named Desdemona, and who works with a villainous ensign who inspires the Moor to jealousy with tragic consequences. All these pieces remain the same in Shakespeare's version, but as usual, Shakespeare adds complexity and nuance to the whole situation. The same Italian author, by the way, wrote the story that
Even just calling him the Moor, ugh, I don't even know if I want to watch this. It's just talking about him in such racialized terms instead of saying like his name, Othello, talking about Othello, like as a character with thoughts and feelings, but it is constantly, or he is constantly referred to in racialized terms. Like, even the full name of the play is, let's see, The Tragedy of Othello, the Moor of Venice. So it's like he was a marginalized person of what is considered of like not in the majority of the white race in Venice at the time. And so it also is like this idea of him being a Moor intentionally makes him racially ambiguous, which is a type of monolithization. Is that a word? There's probably some form of that. I'm gonna look this up. Making him into a monolith. Lithization? Nope. Making him into a monolith of like all of these races, of saying like, oh, he's Arab, or he's black, or he is Daisy in some way, where it is just like, oh, he's a Moor, which is an extremely like racially charged word that would be used during Shakespeare's time to really just describe anyone who was viewed as non-white. Ugh, I don't know if I even want to watch this.
For measure, I've got videos about that one. The story of Shakespeare's Othello takes place in two distinct locations, Venice and Cyprus. Venice, for an early modern audience, is a very exciting place. It is a city with a reputation for commerce and multiculturalism. Within the city of Venice, people from Europe engage in trade with people from North Africa and the Ottoman Empire and everywhere else, really. It's a place where one could hear different languages being spoken and smell spices from all over the world. Because of its location and its position in an increasingly globalizing economy, Venice is always involved in tensions between Europe and the Ottoman Empire. It's a place that requires the presence of foreign merchants, but it also fears the influence of foreign militaries at disrupting that trade that Venice depends upon. It needs the presence of those born outside of Venice, but it's also cautious of people born from outside Venice. The other location, Cyprus, is interesting for other reasons. Venice ruled the island of Cyprus since the end of the 1400s, and early plotline in Othello will revolve around Venice needing to protect its position on that island and the Christian population within Cyprus from the Turkish Ottoman Empire. In order to do this, the Duke of Venice will send Othello to protect the island. This will be outlined in Act 1. The reason I bring this up is because if we were seeing this play performed in 1603, we would all be very aware of the fact that Venice lost the island of Cyprus to the Ottomans during the Fourth Venetian War in the early 1570s. The Ottomans conquered the island and held it all the way until 1878. So the action of Shakespeare's play must take place sometime in the late 1560s, before the Ottomans drive Venice off the island of Cyprus. So for Shakespeare's entire life, including the writing and performing of Othello, the Ottoman Empire already conquered Cyprus. Anyone watching Othello in the 17th century watches it knowing that Venice will not be successful in defending that island. That's subtext for the whole tragedy we witness on stage. We watch knowing that the tragedy of Othello is linked with, in the eyes of Christian Europe, the tragedy of Cyprus. The tragedy of Othello is primarily a domestic tragedy about a husband and wife, but there is a historical subtext that implies that domestic tragedies can have global consequences. Maybe Othello could have protected Cyprus had the events outlined in this play not ruined him. So that's the importance of the setting. I now want to turn to the importance of structure. The play's structure is influenced by the form of a medieval morality play, so it's worth time just to quickly explain what a medieval morality play is. It's a short play, often performed by ordinary people, built around a simple concept. A protagonist who represents a generic human, this character is sometimes even named something like everyman, and this everyman is surrounded by a bunch of characters who represent vices and virtues. The virtues try to help every man into heaven, while the vices try to tempt him towards sin. So there could be characters named friendship or charity, but also a character named sloth or lust. Everyone on stage fights for influence over the everyman character's soul, and typically the everyman is tempted, falls, and is then redeemed. That's a medieval morality play. Because Shakespeare's audience would recognize this narrative archetype, it might be interesting to point out some of the similarities here. It's very easy to read this play as a fight for Othello's soul. On one side, you have the angel, his wife, Desdemona, pulling him toward a supportive marriage, and on the other side, you have a devil, Iago, tempting him toward wrath and jealousy. There are virtues and vices competing for Othello's soul, and it should be noted that the character representing sin in these medieval morality plays would be charismatic and often talk to the audience directly, just as Iago will in this play. But of course, nothing is ever simple in Shakespeare. He will take those...
Yeah, which also there's this gendered aspect of women usually having like proximity to virtue, that they are expected to be virtuous.
That his audience has, and he'll subvert them or add nuances.
Whatever that means, which is really just like Christian ideas of
I'm going to publish one video per act. Each video is going to focus on a specific topic or theme Shakespeare explores.
Supporting your husband
the first video
in
will focus on Act 1,
patriarchy.
and specifically the role storytelling plays, the way archetypes can be used to influence a reader's experience. Those angels and devils, for example. That video on Act 1 will also focus on the ways characters try to tell their own stories. Some characters get to speak for themselves and control their own story, while others have stories told about them. The ability to tell and control one's own story allows a character to control the way that they are perceived in the world. Othello and Iago are both exceptional storytellers, and by
a
telling
concept
stories, they both
that
try
is
to bend reality
true
to fit
not
their
just in
individual
Shakespeare.
narratives. In Act 2, we're going to focus on reputations. Iago has a reputation for honesty, Othello for bravery.
If people can control their own stories, then what? Then the system can't control what is being told about people, which is why there is this, why ethnic cleansing is embarked upon, because it is to erase people's humanity.
Mona for virtue, and Cassio for being a big ol' flirt. Reputations impact the way these characters are treated, and reputations are also difficult to move on from, good or bad. In that video, we're going to talk about the importance of reputation within the play and the way the characters link their reputation on Earth to the fate of their soul in the afterlife. In Act 3, we're going to focus on how the play deals with vision and sight. Much will be made of the way the title character looks, and much will be made about the way certain actions appear to those who witness them. This play has an absurd amount of references to eyes looking and seeing. Sight is understood to be the best kind of proof within the logic of this play, so we're going to dig in and see what that's all about. In Act 4, we're going to focus on the role gender plays in Othello by looking specifically at masculinity and how the characters in this play understand manhood and the impact of those expectations on the individual characters. And in Act 5,
it being associated with violence,
some characters are permitted
primarily,
to speak and some aren't. In the final act of the play, some characters will become silent forever, either through their own choice or through their death, or both. And once we finish reading the entire play, I will produce one final video that will discuss the role of colorism and race through the entire play, and the perceptions and understandings of race in England during Shakespeare's life. So please subscribe to be notified when those videos are published, and for deep dives into other plays. Thank you for watching.
Okay, I guess it didn't end as egregious as what it started out as, but I don't know if I want to trust his opinion on race and colorism. I mean, as someone who is light-skinned, but also not completely white, of like experiencing a lot of racializing in my own experience, like, I don't know. There's nuance there, but I would rather hear from other people on their views on race and colorism in Shakespeare than him. Because that's what we should be doing, in my mind. Like, actually hearing from people who are most affected by these systems, who, you know, have lived experience with what it is like. Okay, so getting on my reading gloves, let's read the first little bit of this introduction to Othello in my Norton Anthology. And once again, this is a form of classism and capitalism in academia, of having all of these books, these academic books, be so fucking expensive that I'm like, I'm gonna wear this shit out. I'm keeping this because I like Shakespeare, and I'm going to be using it and also disseminating the information. They say heaven is more human than human, but hell is abandonment. Wait, they say heaven is more human than human, but hell is abandonment and exile from humanity. Oh, yeah. Because, like, heaven, I love that. Heaven is this idea of what it means to, like, surpass human, human weakness. Hello, androgynous water. Welcome. Good to see you. We are starting to read the introduction of Othello. I don't know if that's your thing, but getting a little nerdy over here as we do. How are you doing? Well, I really like that quote, Taco, of just saying that, like, yeah, hell is meaning like the absence of humanity. Very interesting. Hello, hello, welcome. Okay, so in my gigantic anthology, this is the introduction to Othello. Quote, "The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line," end quote. So prophesied the African-American intellectual and activist W.E.B. Du Bois in his classic study, The Souls of Black Folk, just as the century began, which I'm actually reading on my own. It's definitely in like the beginning of W.E.B. Du Bois's writing, where he was much more into like the idea of buying into the system, like the talented 10th, and feeling like as long as Black people in America specifically had education or access to education, that it would improve everyone's conditions, as opposed to looking at like the system itself as being inherently corrupt and oppressive. Du Bois's prediction may have been premature with respect to Shakespearean tragedy, where Hamlet, King Lear, and Macbeth continue to dominate critical attention throughout most of the 20th century. But today, I mean, I think especially Macbeth deals with race. This is a more reductive way of looking at race. It's like that one interview we were watching with Toni Morrison, where she's like, there are people who are considered white authors now that were not considered white at the time, like James Joyce, where they're constantly talking about race. Of in Macbeth, like the Scottish Highlands, and how there are indigenous practices being quite literally demonized and at risk because of these like colonizing forces. But today, Othello speaks to readers and audiences alike with unusual power, largely because it explores race and racism in an unsettling fashion. Does this emphasis, centered on the dark skin of the title character, belatedly recognize a crucial issue previously neglected or misconstrued? Alternatively, does the recent preoccupation with race, recent? See, this is why we have to keep a decolonizing lens with all of this shit. Does the recent preoccupation with race impose contemporary concerns on material with a different orientation? Thinking that there wasn't like racialized constructs even at the time of Shakespeare is like really weird. White isn't a race. It's got no shared history or culture. It's an exclusionary concept. Ask the Irish or Italian. Yeah, exactly. It's like, this is why race is a social construct, and constantly having a moving goalpost that is arbitrary and saying who is in the quote unquote in crowd and who is not, that then the forces and powers that be can then define who they are then stepping on to justify these systems of hierarchy. Yes to both questions. Okay. Wait, did I read that last one? Wait, yes, I did. Yes to both questions. Interpretation is always influenced by both past and present. Here, by the play itself, together with its theatrical and critical heritage, and by the current preoccupations of contemporary audiences and readers. Saying it's a current preoccupation is such an academic way of being like, oh, decolonization is a very modern lens. It's like, no, the lens of decolonization has existed since colonization has existed. Just because it hasn't been like accepted into like the white academic sphere doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. A complex work elicits different responses in different times or places. In Othello, to oversimplify, one issue, jealousy, was formerly more prominent, while another, race, has emerged or re-emerged only recently. Or only more recently that white people have been actually paying attention to this concept of race. Because that has been very apparent and clear to people who are considered non-white throughout the ages when they encounter this play. Neither race nor jealousy is the play's sole concern. Othello provocatively investigates gender and sexuality. It is preoccupied with class conflict, morality, and metaphysics. And it sets its central domestic disaster against the international conflict between Venetians and Turks over the island of Cyprus, a religious, political, and military antagonism that subtly informs the characters' catastrophic personal relationships. This thematic range can be investigated by looking at Shakespeare's handling of his sources, at his unusual manipulation of dramatic genres, and hence of audience expectations, at the psychology of Iago and Othello, as well as their interaction, and finally at race itself. Much of Othello's plot, but little of its outlook, characterization, or language, derives from Giovan Battista Giraldi's Cinthio's Daily Hecatomethi. Whoa. 100 Tales. Okay. Sorry to the Italians out there. Third decade, seventh story, 1565. In Shakespeare's version, racial issues are more persistent. The play here, of what the original, inspiration for this was that Italian play. The play here draws primarily on the 1600 translation of A Geographical History of Africa by Leo Africanus, a Moroccan Muslim who had been captured by Christian pirates and brought to Rome, where he converted to Catholicism. So it's like Othello and his race is constantly being reinterpreted as, depending on people's, racial prejudices, and also the problem of making him into a monolith is that he doesn't have as much of an identity. And this is why as well that this is a concept that people who are considered non-white will understand right from the beginning. The public world of Venetian Turkish affairs, absent from Cinthio, probably derives from Richard Knowles' general history of the Turks. Minor characters are given interesting twists. For instance, Emilia, the wife of Iago, the story's villain, is passive in Cinthio, but in Shakespeare speaks for the rights of women, stands by Desdemona, Othello's wife, and ultimately brings her own husband down, at the cost of her life. So there are spoilers in here. Just so you know. Maybe I should have opened with that. Sorry. The introduction will spoil things in the play, but at least it is with the hope that we are understanding more of what it means in the play. So if you are not interested in learning the spoilers, you may want to wait till we start into the actual reading, which I will put in the notifications for when I go live. Okay. The changes to Iago and Othello are even more consequential. Unlike Daily Hecatomethe's malefactor, who is motivated by unrequited lust for Desdemona and anger that she has refused his advances, Shakespeare's Iago loathes Othello and is determined to destroy him. So this also lends itself to a very like queer reading of it, of like these internalized queer-phobic structures that Iago is not only jealous of Othello and like wants Othello, whether it's romantically, sexually, he also wants Desdemona in a more like objective way, like sexually, and how when there are people who have this self-hatred that they then want to bring about the doom of other people. His manipulative mastery is given greater scope, which I think is giving Iago too much credit, thereby enhancing a sense of his power as well as his fathomless viciousness. Similarly, by making Othello Desdemona's killer, Iago's job in Cinthio, and by having him publicly acknowledge his responsibility for the act, Shakespeare increases the character's guilt as well as his grandeur, the latter further enhanced by an elevation in social status from his previous position in the source. Thus, Othello, like daily Hecatommithi, ties everything to the central murder. Okay, I'm going to read this next paragraph, and then I think we'll be done. Yeah. The manipulation of generic expectations in Othello produces multiple perspectives on the plot. Though familiar with the classical dramatic genres of comedy and tragedy, Shakespeare was also influenced by late medieval, early Renaissance morality plays, like what that introduction video was talking about, by Renaissance experimentation with hybrid forms. Hence, all of his plays are mixtures, which is why, like, one of the things that I think is more genius about Shakespeare is that he didn't feel compelled to abide by form really strictly. And it's ironic because, like many, like, groundbreaking, artistic types of movements or works, that this gets minimized in academic, like, historian, context and discussion, that it is essentially to like minimize these larger ideas of like pushing back against these oppressive systems and like what people should and shouldn't do to create good art, quote unquote good art. Hence, all of his plays are mixtures. The distinctiveness of Othello, however, lies not in the co-presence of comic and tragic elements, a common feature in Shakespearean drama, but in the work's daring experiments with shifting generic frameworks. Okay, I thought I skipped a line. Its opening act, probably Shakespeare's invention, employs a strategy of studied indirection. It is night in a city, Venice, we are later told. Plot and character are presented in non-specific terms. Roderigo is irritated that Iago shouldst know of this, of such a matter matter concerning a him, an unnamed personage invoked only by pronouns. Pronouns, you say? What? They were using pronouns? Even back then? That's too woke. Oh no. Hard to believe this play inspired modern orthopedics. Did it? What? I didn't know that. Wait. Tell me about this. I'm excited to learn about this. Thank you for letting me know. An unnamed personage invoked only by pronouns until the snide reference to his moorship, which is racist. The play's first audiences might have connected this character with the titular figure, even though Othello himself does not appear on stage until Scene 2 and is not named until Scene 3. Iago tells Roderigo to call up her father, again without identifying her or her father. So this is both racist and sexist by having Othello not enter the namesake of the play until Scene 3, and that, like, we don't even learn his name, but that also Desdemona is not named at all. No, I'm shitposting. Okay. It's like, what's going on? I'm not gonna pretend like I know everything about this play, so I definitely fell for that one. I mean, in my defense, you do tell me a lot about things that I don't already know about, so let's see. The two men provoke Brabantio, her father, in similar oblique fashion, only gradually revealing that Roderigo's this is a sexual relationship, and still later that it is a marriage. Their imprecision about this encourages the audience to wonder what kind of play they are watching. And this is especially Shakespearean to have a dirty mind. So like the people who want to claim like these like classist people that are like, oh, it's like the height of class. It's like, okay, you're talking about class, but you do know that like Shakespeare was extremely dirty minded and like had all of these sexual jokes and would often make fun of the ruling class by like speaking in slang of the working class that the ruling class would not understand. Um, it turns out to be a romantic comedy. Okay. at, at least in this part, it's very much a tragedy. Iago and Roderigo's strategy is aimed at persuading Brabantio to nullify the union. They do get Brabantio's aid, but they do not get what they want. Against the cultural norms of Shakespeare's time and subsequent centuries, the play celebrates Othello's grandeur. Desdemona, at least in like Western culture, Western white culture specifically. Desdemona's assertive autonomy, she wooed him. Yeah, that the minimization of Shakespeare's women, I think, cannot be understated, especially when it comes to like portrayals in film. That he was not particularly like a huge feminist at the time, but he also like wrote women to have more autonomy and like minds, like be thinking. And part of that might have to do with the fact that he was viewing himself as having a more similar experience because in Shakespeare's time, men and young men, boys were only allowed to act on stage, that women were not allowed to, and girls, that it was viewed as being indecent, as not virtuous. So it's like you had men kissing men on stage. It's hella queer. You had men, young boys, dressing up as women, especially when they are young men, so that they can have higher voices and that they're like the more complex female characters in Shakespeare's plays, many people think are often inspired by like young men that were in Shakespeare's troupe. So like whether it was like a feminist lean or not, whether he actually viewed women as like being more like thinking human beings, Shakespeare wrote women to be more fully formed than many other people at the time, at least in the area that he was living, in the British Isles, that because he was viewing them as being more similar to men because of who he was writing for, including himself, because he would act in these plays sometimes. I looked up Latin origin of ortho prefix meaning straight, upright, rectangular, regular, true, correct, proper. Oh, ortho. Interesting. Okay. Marriage between Moor and Venetian, old and young, black and white. The initial suppression of the names of the lovers rendered them as character types to which stylized attributes, however misleading, can be attached before their individuality emerges. The darkness and the urban setting point to romantic concerns. The villain's machinations fail. The opposition of the old father, a standard blocking figure in stage comedy, proves ineffectual. The Duke, the play's highest-ranking character, ratifies the marriage. It has all been so easy. Midway through the third scene, the story is over. At least the comedy aspect of it. And usually in Shakespeare's comedies, or especially at the time, what would categorize a comedy is that there would be like some funny things happening, but the hallmark of it was predominantly that it would end in a marriage. So like it doesn't always mean that it would end in a happy manner. Like Which play am I thinking of? As You Like It. As You Like It does not usually have this like super happy ending. Like it ends in a marriage, so it's a comedy, but the ending is kind of like makes you, if you're actually reading the text in the way that it's happening, in a more uneasy fashion. So like that doesn't always mean that like he viewed marriage as like being the end all be all, because especially Shakespeare being very queer himself, which is not highlighted in many portrayals, like even in this latest film Hamnet. I enjoyed the film Hamnet, but I think it minimized his queer identity a lot. There are like multiple sonnets that people know of him to have written about a young man that he was in love with. Like, the Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day is inspired by a young man. That the term drag, this is kind of legend. It's not really confirmed, but many people think it comes from Shakespeare, and that in the margins of his manuscripts, he would write drag to have as shorthand for dressed as girl. So like that's where that term comes from. Like Shakespeare is super, super queer. So like the fact that like me being at BYU for college, this very Mormon school, and not having access to these more like feminist, queer centric readings made it so that we had very shallow interpretations of what it meant. And like me being like a queer little nerd and like androgynous, like, you know, non-binary person, not out at the time, but also being like, what is this? Can I talk about this? I would be like nerdy and like go to my professor's office hours sometimes, because they would be like, we can't talk about this here, like queer theory and stuff. They're like, but if you want to talk about it during our office hours, and I'm like, can we talk about this? Can we talk about drag? And like being exposed to more like queer theory that way. But that goes to show like the suppression, that even though we didn't talk about queer theory, it didn't make me less queer or feminist. So it's just funny, the things they try to control. That's like, that doesn't mean that it's not happening, sweetheart. This is just what it means to be human. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art hot. Yeah, exactly. Especially these days. Like, oh, you are making me inflamed. Oh, okay. I think I'm gonna have to end things there today, but we will continue the introduction tomorrow. I think I'm going to give it a little more time than what I did today. We may have a little more focus on Othello for tomorrow. It's going to be more of a bookish day tomorrow, because we'll also be following up with The Bluest Eye. Actually, going ahead with this reading, where I need a reminder of where I even had this. We are reading from page, at least in this edition, in the chapter, here's the family, mother, father, Dick, and Jane. They live in the green and white house. They are very, because it's a run-on sentence, essentially, the name of the chapter. It goes from page 38 in this edition to page 44. So that doesn't seem like it's very long, but that really is just like how packed with meaning all of this art is. So I want to give it the time it deserves. We'll be talking more about Desdemona, the play that Toni Morrison wrote as well. So I think it will be, I'm trying to plan things strategically. I think it will be lending themselves very well to each of these things that we're reading. So anyway, my mind was all over the place here, but again, what is new? All right, that's going to be it for me today, but thank you for being here. It was wonderful being with you, chatting with you. Thank you for your patience with all of the technical difficulties, with the power being out earlier today for me. But seems like we were able to get up and running without as many incidents, so that's a win. We'll take it where we can. Okay, thank you for being here. I hope you have a good rest of your day, evening, wherever you are, and I will see you soon. Okay, bye.